Welcome to Rebel Roundup, ladies and gentlemen, and the rest of you, in which we look back at some of the very best commentaries of the week by your favorite rebels. I'm your host, David Menzies. Well, Keean Bexte traveled into northern BC to get the goods on the Coastal GasLink pipeline, and he'll offer his insight regarding how people there really feel about this project. Hey now, the freak show is back in town. Yeah, of course, I'm talking about Jonathan, aka Jessica Yaniv, the deranged con man who dines out on, well, gaming the system. It was back in a BC court the other day, and incredibly, it seems as if there is a deal afoot that will allow him to pretty much skate on those charges regarding that illegal weaponry. Sheila Gunn Reid has the latest. And finally, letters. We get your letters. We get your letters every minute of every day. And I'll share some of your responses regarding my coverage of that rail blockade near Belleville, Ontario, that was finally dismantled by the authorities after almost 3 weeks. And no, I still don't understand what took them so long. Those are your rebels. Now let's round them up.
The Prime Minister has ordered the blockades to come down after he extended many hands to speak with you guys. And if you couldn't even negotiate with Justin Trudeau, someone who's already on your side, who's already sympathetic to destroying the oil and gas industry in Canada, how are you going to get your way? What are you going to do to hold the nation hostage? I even spoke to some of the local Indigenous folks to ask them what was on their mind, whether or not they supported these blockades. Listen to this. What's your take on all of this pipeline issue going on right now?
I'm actually conflicted a lot about the pipeline issue here because I think that LNG might actually be a good thing, but I also believe that our mountains and our streams are very, very important to protect. So I'm kind of on the fence a bit. I just wish everybody would come together and talk things out instead of forcing things.
Well, how very interesting. Some white social justice warrior can't even articulate why the heck he's trying to put the kibosh on the coastal GasLink project, but a bona fide native offers up a nuanced and conciliatory approach. Gee, wonder why she doesn't get interviewed by the media party. And with more on his epic adventure into northern BC is Keean Bexte. Welcome to Rebel Roundup, my friend.
Thank you for having me.
Always a pleasure. Good to have you in the flesh, too, I might add. Now, you went all the way up to, I guess, ground zero, if you will, Keean, in regards to the Coastal GasLink project. What was your impression in terms of the lay of the land, particularly in terms of who supports this project and who is dead set against it?
Well, I think that there's two sets of people up in Smithers and Houston, that area up in northern BC. There's the people who have come to that community to work. Their families have been there working in the logging industry and a few other industries, and they're set to benefit from the business of that pipeline coming in, and they are all for it. Everyone there that is in there and lives there in that capacity is very supportive of this pro-business plan to get this pipeline built and all of the different ways that that's going to help the local economy. And then
and we must mention 20 out of 20 native band councils where the pipeline runs through, all in support, right?
Yeah, but I'm not just speaking about natives in particular in this group, although they do sort of overlap. There's a big Venn diagram that I could draw. But then there's the actual legal Indians, status Indians, band members, and they have a little bit more nuanced approach. Of course, they support they want to protect first and foremost the water and the land and the trees, but many of them understand that comes part and parcel with working with the companies who are going to be putting the pipeline in the ground, whether they like it or not. Because of course the bands have all voted saying yes, we want it, but now they're trying to think of a way, well, how do we do this in a way that benefits our whole community? And this one individual that I talked to, she was talking about how the funds that this is going to raise for their band and the boost in the economy is going to hopefully help with the opioid crisis, the opioid epidemic that they've been seeing up there in northern BC. They've been seeing it across the country, but northern BC is quite affected by it, especially the First Nations community. And they see this as an opportunity to make some ground there, which I think is really interesting because that's part of the story that you don't hear from the mainstream media. This pipeline with it comes jobs, with it comes money, and with any community, that means that suicides go down. It means that mental health gets better. People are employed and they're happy to be working. And with that comes combating the opioid crisis, and that's of chief concern to many of these people, not what we're being led to believe by these radicals blockading pipelines. They say that they speak on behalf of the Wet Sweat, and that's not the case at all. The Wet Sweat have spoken. They say they want this pipeline, but they want different things dealt with, like the opioid crisis. They want jobs. This idea that this pipeline is going to destroy the climate and it's going to lead to hellfire. That's not at all what I saw on the ground.
No, and in fact, natives, even the people who are against this project, let's be honest, Keean, they are all living their lives via fossil fuels. They want to stay warm. I think when you were there, it was like minus 30 or some ungodly temperature. They want to be able to drive around. No one's taken dog sleds as a form of commuting.
There was a skidoo in that very camp behind the shed. As I was driving forward and recording, I noticed out of the corner of my eye there was a skidoo, like what is it, a skidoo? Is that the right word?
A snowmobile. Skidoo is a brand name.
Exactly. Okay, so that of course does not run on pixie dust.
It's amazing, Keean, because I remember it was on something called the Polar Safari. It was going into Nunavut, and it was for a 2-week expedition to find somewhere to go hot air ballooning. It kind of turned into a Lord of the Flies situation. I've never been so cold in my life, but that's beside the point. But one of our guides was an Inuit, and there was somebody from France, and I knew I would hate him right away because on his parka he had a George Bush photograph with the universal slash through it. And he went to the Inuit native and he said, isn't it terrible how the white man has destroyed your way of life? I think back when you had dog teams and you didn't have guns, but you had spears. And this guy looked at him like he was from Mars. He said, listen, my great-grandfather's people, when they would go on a hunt with those spears, there was a chance that they would die if they didn't, kill the bear. And I can drive further in 2 hours on a snowmobile than I can traverse in 2 weeks with a dog sled team. So the point is that this technology benefits everyone. It doesn't have to be mutually exclusive to get the fossil fuels out of the ground and ruin the environment. So why is this narrative being perpetuated, Keean?
Wealth redistribution. There's so many reasons why these radical environmentalists do what they do, and that's what they are. These people that are advocating it, there's a sliver of them that overlap in this Venn diagram. They're radical environmentalists and they happen to be Aboriginal. But the majority of these people at the blockades, they're just radical environmentalists, and they see that right now there's really good SEO ratings on Aboriginal justice and Indigenous reconciliation. So they're using that plight and they're co-opting it so that they can get what they want, which is really getting off of fossil fuels, redistributing rich people's wealth so that everyone can enjoy this communist utopia that they all really want deep down. I think about these people, especially at the Edmonton climate justice group, these group of people that are just, they talk about the environment in this lens of Marxist, Leninist garbage, right? Like it's all part and parcel.
And that is typical. The green movement really, Keean, from what I can tell and from the protesters that I meet on the site, this is just the red movement with a new coat of paint, isn't it?
Yes, it's the green movement. It's just like I saw the same thing with Greta Thunberg up in Stockholm. She has this green guard that she uses, just like Mao had this red guard. She has this green guard of children that she uses to protect herself. This tactics that these commies used, they just transfer over perfectly with a fresh coat of green paint.
And McGrath would be proud.
Yes.
I think there is an added layer of complication, though, because as I mentioned, Keean, earlier, 20 out of 20 native band councils where the pipeline go through, they're all in support of this. But then you get into the business of, but what do the hereditary chiefs say? And some of them aren't on the side. Last week I was in the Belleville area. on the Mohawk Reserve. Chief Woos, who also goes by the name Frank Alec, he's our hereditary chief from Wet'suwet'en. And he's against this pipeline for whatever reason. By the way, they had a press conference where everybody at the table had plastic water bottles. So again, more hypocrisy there. But it comes down to this for me, and for an outsider, especially when you're not in the Native community, who is speaking for whom in the Native community?
Look, the hereditary chiefs are speaking for themselves. These are the kind of hypocrites, and not all of the hereditary chiefs, I should point that out. Many of them support the pipeline,
Correct.
and those people have been promptly given the boot. But these radical hereditary chiefs, who you see in these traditional regalia at walking through the mud, which really peeves off most of the real hereditary chiefs who think that that's, it's like taking the scepter that sits in the House of Commons and dropping it in the dirt. Like this is effectively the same thing to them. They're disgusted by it, and the hereditary chiefs, they simply do not represent their people in the way that they're being represented in the mainstream media. That's not, they're corrupting their own cause by trying to pretend that they are somehow these holy figures who hold some sort of clout with their community, when in reality the people who are claiming they're hereditary chiefs have actually neglected their duty in some cases to consult, because their leadership style is this participatory potlatch kind of deal where the leaders only have the authority to act as hereditary chiefs if they consult with their people, which they have quit doing actually in some cases.
And by the way, Keean, when you use the word consult and dialogue, in the early going at least, that was what we were getting from Justin Trudeau. We need more dialogue, we need more consultation. And I was always of the opinion, no, because this is an illegal act, these rail blockades. And secondly, there's a court order. And once a court order is issued, dialogue is over. It's officially done. There's been a decision, yet for days after that court order was sanctioned, weeks actually, this was allowed to go on. I think this was a grotesque fumbling of the ball by the Trudeau Liberals. And furthermore, I think it has only emboldened every radical group, from Extinction Rebellion to Antifa, to simply go and camp out on train tracks. And we're seeing that happen in kind of like a whack-a-mole pop-up basis on a daily basis, Keean.
I mean, I couldn't say it better myself, and it's getting to the point where Quebec is running out of fuel. As we film this today, Quebec is 4 days away from running out of fuel. So, I mean, at what point does this tip? At what point does the teapot spill? And I mean, it's coming very rapidly, I think.
And even with the precedent of what happened in Belleville, I mean, in Hamilton, they allowed those protesters to shut down the rail corridor for 24 hours. Whereas I, within the first half hour of being on site, was threatened with trespass for practicing journalism. I truly think, Keean, if this is allowed to continue on, and I'm not against peaceful protesting, but it can't be at the expense of the economy of hundreds of millions of dollars. And I think if we allow this to go on, the Wet'suwet'en issue isn't even going to be the only issue on the table. You're going to see people out there, militant vegans to the whole Free Palestine crowd, sitting on railroad tracks and saying, hey,
Until
I dare
they get
you.
what they want.
Yeah.
You're absolutely right about that.
It is absolutely a disgrace. Keean, if you're to do a little crystal ball gazing, because right now we're in that process where these pop-up protests are happening on a daily basis, when are we going to have the rule of law once and for all enforced on the train tracks? And by that I mean the second they trespass on federal rail lines, they are hauled off. None of this, let's have a dialogue for a day or two. When are we going to get back to normalcy?
I mean, I hate predicting because I'm usually wrong, but I would say it's once chaos hits. I mean, we haven't seen chaos yet. Yeah. Chaos comes when the coronavirus starts community spread in Calgary and Montreal, and there's no medical supplies. The Port of Vancouver imports 30,000 metric tons of medical supplies, and it was blockaded for 24 hours just on Monday, I believe. There's a point when this is going to reach, this will reach a point where hospitals are going to start suffering, houses our pipes in houses are going to start bursting because there's no propane. There will be a point when chaos will grip Canada if this continues, and I think it will come to it will come to something more than what it is right now, because right now nobody has the balls to do anything. Trudeau, the least of anyone.
You know, you might be right. It might come to something like somebody actually dying in hospital because the supplies weren't there. And that's the thing, folks. What gets onto store shelves, what gets into institutions like hospitals, chances are it came on rail and then truck. And the hypocrisy of these protests, I mean, I saw it the other day when I was in Hamilton for that 24-hour blockade. These are people that aren't even Native, although some will say they identify as being Native, and yet they're wearing nylon jackets, they have $800 cell phones, they're living in polypropylene tents. The hypocrisy is off the charts. Hopefully there's going to be some actual real leadership on this file, and these Lugans, these hooligans, these agitators are going to be arrested because they are indeed breaking the law. Keep it here. More of Rebel Roundup to come right after this.
Now, this is what I can tell you about court today. Yaniv has hired a lawyer, Andrew Coulthard, who appeared on his behalf in courtroom 100 at 10 a.m. Yaniv's lawyer asked that the case be put over for disposition March 16th, 2020. And that could mean a few different things. However, I also heard Yaniv's lawyer say that he and the Crown were discussing a, quote, resolution to the case. So, after court, I sought some legal advice of my own from our Vancouver-based lawyers who are assisting us in navigating this enormous legal spiderweb Yaniv is just spinning around himself with all of his charges and constant court appearances. Now, here's what our lawyer explained to me. It sounds like there are plea deal discussions taking place, and this thing with Yaniv and the charges for prohibited weapons might not be going to trial at all, which is not all that unusual. But we can't be sure until after we see what takes place in the courthouse behind me, March 16th.
Well, that traveling one-man freak show known as Jonathan Yaniv was back in the BC court for another appearance, this time with a lawyer in tow. And oh man, I hope that solicitor is charging Yaniv about $1,000 an hour. But as you saw, folks, looks like there might be a deal afoot that might allow this creep to skate without any serious penalty, even though there is video evidence of Yaniv posing with a prohibited weapon. Unbelievable. And with the latest installment of the Bully Who Wants His Balls Whacked show is our very own Sheila Gunn Reid. Welcome to Rebel Roundup in person, my friend.
Hey, David. It is so, I think this is the very first time I've been on the show, any of the shows, in studio. So,
you're right.
Yeah.
And they say you always remember your first time. Anyways, Sheila, tell me it isn't so. We seem to have a situation going on, if your interpretation is correct, that Yaniv is somehow going to be accommodated by a real court of law, much like he was, at least in the initial stages, accommodated by a kangaroo court of law. I'm, of course, speaking of the BC Human Rights Tribunal. What's going on?
Well, while we were there, his lawyer did appear on his behalf. He wasn't there, which is probably wise. Might be the only legal advice he's following lately. And they did put the case over for disposition, which means that there is likely some sort of resolution coming and that it's not proceeding to trial. We sought some legal advice, and it sounds like there's probably a plea agreement or plea negotiations taking place. We don't really know what those will look like, but I can tell you that what Jonathan Yaniv is facing with these 2 counts would be similar to myself being in possession of illegal handguns, automatic weapons. That's what a taser, a conductive energy device, that's the law surrounding it in Canada. So that Jonathan Yaniv is, what sounds like it could be a plea deal here. I think that's a little bit atrocious considering he's also facing assault charges with Keean. So, hopefully we won't really know exactly what's happening,
but hopefully he's just flat out pleading guilty to avoid trial and maybe curry favor with the court. But really, frankly, we're just speculating right now. But you do make a great point that he is able to manipulate the system. Every system he goes near, he's able to game it for his own benefit.
And Sheila, remind us again, what is the maximum penalty he can face if convicted guilty? But also with all the, I suppose, plea bargaining going on, what do you think? What are your spidey senses telling you in terms of the penalty he's going to have to pay?
You know, off the top of my head, I think it was 5 to 10 years for prohibited weapons. But who knows? Yeah. We don't know if he has a criminal record prior to this, really. So we don't know, you know, where he would fall in the sentencing scale. And right. I'm not a lawyer. That's why we pay a high-priced Vancouver lawyer to help us navigate all this, because there really is a spider web of legal proceedings all around Jonathan Yaniv with all the cases and lawsuits and everything around him. We have to hire professionals to help us just get through it all and to get access to the courthouse, because Keean was kept out of one of these hearings with Jonathan Yaniv by the sheriffs. And Keean's a journalist. He should have access to Canada's open court system. That's how the public has trust and faith in the court system, is that they can go and observe the administration of justice.
And by the way, Sheila, it must be pointed out that the rationale the sheriffs gave for barring Keean from entry into the courtroom was a regulation that didn't exist.
Yeah, they're just making things up.
This is mind-boggling.
It's crazy the amount of people that are people who really should know better and in an official capacity who are enabling Jonathan Yaniv outside of his own enabling mom. I don't know what their interests are in all of this, but Jonathan Yaniv is very good at just manipulating his way out of everything.
But here's the thing, Sheila. I think trends right now in the culture we live in on the so-called human rights hierarchy, for example, if a white, able-bodied, straight male is at the foundation or even underground, trans is at the very top of the pyramid. However, what makes my mind boggle is that even it seems to me the vast majority of people in the trans community are saying, we don't want anything to do with this guy. It's a disgrace. He's given us a bad name. So why are whoever these political masters are behind the scenes ordering around court officers, if that's what was happening, or everyone else, why are they going out on a limb for this guy who I think is a con man with mental health issues?
Well, that's really been the thing, hasn't it? Jonathan Yaniv is at the top of the victims' rights hierarchy because not only is he trans, but he's also allegedly disabled, but he can really put a wiggle in it if he's trying to get away from a camera. It's very fascinating to see the division between just normal LGBTQ people who just want to live their lives and do their own thing, really push away from the likes of Jonathan Yaniv. Jonathan Yaniv, for the longest time, was sheltered by activists within the far left-wing LGBT movement, but that's not even the case anymore. It's not even those folks, it's just the government, really, and agencies of the government in the form of human rights commissions. Those are the only people left entertaining him, and I don't understand why either. I don't have an answer for you.
Indeed, Sheila, you could make the argument that if you were super pro LGBT rights, you would want to prosecute this guy to the furthest extent of the law, but that isn't the case. The other thing too, Sheila, as you reported, no other media there, I believe, and I'm thinking, the reason why we talk about the Jonathan Yaniv story so much is that it is an international story. It is a freak show that people seemingly can't get enough of for obvious reasons. It's almost unbelievable. when I look at, global, CBC, CTV, the local news outlets, it's all about, being in the media. It's generating eyeballs. It's getting viewers. You would think they would lead with this story, but they don't seem to think there's a story here at all, even though, like I said, it's gone around the globe. Explain.
Well, that really is the case. This isn't a story of international interest. When I go there, there is absolutely no other journalists there. Last time there was somebody there from True North, but not this time. I guess it's really easy for the other media to pick and choose the stories that they want to cover when they don't really have to concern themselves with the interest of their viewership and the interest of the people who are consuming their media. Yeah. When you're subsidized by Justin Trudeau, you are really not compelled by market forces to cover the stuff your viewers want you to cover. You can cover whatever matches your agenda, and I think that's what's happening here. We are covering something that people are hungry for information about, and that is, clearly demonstrable. And yet the mainstream media are not interested in this because it doesn't jive with their agenda, and they don't have to. They just don't have to.
You're right. It is a safety net, these endless government handouts, so they don't have to be competitive. They don't have to produce stories that sell and sell internationally. In fact, the world is upside down. Speaking of money, though, Sheila, I've asked you about this before. I've asked Keean, certainly. I don't know if there is an answer, but this person, Yaniv, seems to be that this is his profession, being an agitator, going to court, filing complaints with human rights tribunals, et cetera, et cetera. You mentioned he's got a lawyer now. I don't even know if he has a job. This must be a considerable expense. I know if I had to go through even 10% of what he's going through, I would have been personally bankrupt by now. Do we have any connections in terms of where his money is coming from to fuel this incredible fantasy of his?
I wish I could tell you. As this is a criminal case now, maybe he has a public defender. Maybe this is, through legal aid. I'm not quite sure how that works in British Columbia. But all of the civil stuff, it looks like he was self-representing himself. Yeah. And with the Human Rights Commission, the person you're accusing of violating your human rights has to get a lawyer and pay for it out of pocket. But if you're the complainant, well then, you have all the government resources at your command to terrorize people with these, fake human rights that his feelings have been hurt. So, really, this is just more Jonathan Yaniv gaming the system. I'm not sure where he's getting his money from. I'm not sure even that he has money, but the way the system is structured, he doesn't really need to have money to do all these things.
Yeah, no, that's a good perspective. And it should be pointed out, Sheila, that as much as he's accommodated financially by the likes of the BC Human Rights Tribunal, as much as the mainstream media is getting endless handouts, for you going out there and doing your hard work, you're flying in from Alberta to British Columbia. Often you're bringing security guards in case Yaniv or Mama Yaniv happen to be there, and they're prone to violence, and I'm speaking from experience, of course. We have, I believe, a website viewers can go to if they have it in their heart to continue funding your journalism on this file, don't we?
Sure, and actually it's the website structured to help you and Keean get justice in your lawsuit against Jonathan Yaniv, because the police didn't do anything for you, and Keean, the police did lay assault charges when he was assaulted by Jonathan Yaniv. But that is yanivtrial.com if people want to support my trip out to BC, my 2 bodyguards, and the lawyer that we need to have on call, just so that we can cover this story that people are genuinely interested in. That's yanivtrial.com.
Well, thank you so much, Sheila. And I even say that right now as I currently identify as an asexual, non-binary spirit unicorn. But check back in 10 minutes. I think then I'll be a Westinghouse toaster. Keep it here, folks. More of Rebel Roundup to come right after this. In any event, this does appear to be the end game I guess it's only a matter of time before the protesters are removed from the tracks, either peacefully or the hard way. Folks, it is now 11:30 a.m. and as you might be able to see behind me, there are now CN trucks and CN workers on the track. This is in spite of the fact that police are still negotiating with some of the protesters, at least those protesters that weren't hauled away in vans. I would say that this is an optimistic sight because obviously the workers are inspecting the tracks, getting ready for those trains to roll, and they're not wasting any time. And can you blame them? Look how many millions of dollars these radicals have cost the Canadian economy already. And so it was that the rail blockade outside of Belleville, Ontario ended earlier this week, not with a big bang, but with a pathetic whimper. Nevertheless, good riddance to those aimless agitators, even though other Lugans continue to fill the void in other parts of Canada. And the economy, well, it shall continue to suffer as a result. It's just so disgraceful. In any event, here's what some of you had to say. Mark W. writes, they should have done this as soon as the blockades went up instead of letting it fester and get media coverage. Well, of course, the complete inaction by the Justin Trudeau Liberals on this file only resulted in emboldening the protesters, and given that nobody is going to be truly penalized, look what's occurring in the aftermath. Whack-a-mole pop-up protests are happening all over the country. Sadly, this railroad fiasco is not over yet. Patrick LaBelle writes, I would not be surprised if Trudeau were to send them a large settlement sum. Gee, Patrick, I never even thought about that. This could even be, spun as Justin's contribution to the Truth and Reconciliation process. How does $10.5 million per protester grab you? Richard Ralph Rowell writes, finally, the police have permission to enforce the rule of law. Time to levy huge fines on the anarchists. Well, sadly, Richard, that ain't going to happen. It's just not politically correct to do so, which is another reason more of these idiotic blockades will be popping up in the days and weeks ahead. And John Cheresna writes, the Mohawks and other First Nations say they are protesting for the land, water, and air. Then they set up another barricade with tires, setting them on fire. So much for the environmental BS. What hypocrites. Oh, John, 100%. I saw tons of environmental degradation occurring at the protest site, from protesters needlessly revving the engines of their parked trucks to some of those vehicles actually leaking oil right onto the land. Oh, and plastic water bottles galore, by the way. Gee, does that other environmental uber phony Greta Thunberg know about this? Well, that wraps up another edition of Rebel Roundup. Thanks so much for joining us. See you next week. And hey, folks, never forget, without risk, there can be no glory. Good night.